During World War I, Wilhelm Wassmuss, aka Wassmuss of Persia, known as the German Lawrence of Arabia, was tasked with setting up rebellions in Persia against the Entente and leading a German expedition to Afghanistan. But in March of 1915, he and his entourage were captured by Persian allies of the British. However, he escaped, yet continually raged about his lost luggage, and in doing so called attention onto it. He went as far as insisting to see the governor of the Persian provincial capital of Shiraz to formally protest his lost luggage and demand its return. However, that would not happen. But you see, his luggage had now fallen into British hands, which included the German diplomatic codes which were in his luggage. So he kept requesting his luggage back, but of course this was impossible since it was held by the India office in London. The diplomatic codebook was later found in his luggage and sent to the famed British cryptology room 40, where the British would then be able to read the German diplomatic codes throughout the war, and this included the infamous Zimmermann telegram. As the only reason the British were able to decrypt the Zimmermann telegram was due to acquiring the codebook from lost luggage in Persia, the question has to be asked: what if Wilhelm Wassmuss didn't lose his luggage and kept the German diplomatic codes? Unlike most alternate history videos I make, there won't really be many conditions to change other than Wassmuss keeping his book on him. Assuming, of course, that Room 40 hasn't been able to break the diplomatic code over the next 2 years of the war, the Zimmermann telegram isn't broken by the British. And no, Mexico is not going to be joining the war against the United States because the country had been in an absolute crazy mode since the outbreak of the Mexican Revolution. Although unrestricted submarine warfare is still happening, I feel like the United States stays out of the war for a bit longer, which will have drastic consequences, but the US will still be joining the war nonetheless. The first major consequence would be that the French mutinies will continue with very low French morale. The thing is, the French troops didn't have a problem with defending their territory, but they were sharply against the pointlessness of offensives, which, if you know anything about the French command structure in World War I in general, that was pretty much every failed offensive they went on. When the US actually declared war on Germany in our timeline, the French strategy became wait for the Americans to arrive. With the United States remaining neutral longer, it might cause France to drop out of the war in 1917, but it's somewhat unlikely, yet noteworthy. I believe it would just result in even lower French morale. The United States would still enter the war because of unrestricted submarine warfare, but it would be later on in 1917, which would mean that, assuming of course the French haven't dropped out of the war yet, then American troops would be arriving in the masses in France to fight against the Germans a few months after they did in our timeline. This would end up giving Germany more time for the Kaiserschlacht offensive to succeed, with less Americans in France as the stormtroopers attack French positions with extremely low and mutinous morale. With a lot less Americans in France because, it takes a while to cross the Atlantic, the German spring offensive of 1918 into France is more successful in claiming more land from the demoralized French. The result probably is a German victory, as despite the fact that the Americans are arriving and ready to mess the living crap out of the Germans, the French can't hold on. So since Germany has forced a French drop out of the war similar to how Russia has dropped out of it, World War I will get even more complicated. Although Germany has been successful at gaining a French withdrawal, the British, American, and Belgian forces in France are still at war with the Germans. This creates an awkward situation for all belligerents, as some French forces are still willing to fight against the Germans and will do so under the command of other Entente belligerents. The thing is that the Germans in France, although having defeated the French government, will be overstretched and fatigued as a new front line essentially settles against the remnant French units and the rest of the entire Entente forces on the Western Front. Yes, Germany will still end up winning the war in Europe, I was getting to that, as a new French government comes into power and has a very hostile relationship with Entente forces remaining in France to fight against the Germans. France wants out of the war, and the government wants all forces out of their smaller territory, as the French don't want any more fighting going on. Whether or not each side respects this is somewhat up in the air. In theory, Germany should respect the treaty that they forced the French to sign, but Entente forces would still want to battle Germans in that area. Turning to other fronts of the war, there has been a German victory in France, but a German victory in Europe doesn't necessarily mean a Central Powers victory throughout the war, as the Central Powers had issues on all other fronts. For instance, Austria-Hungary is going to collapse no matter what, as literally the only front the Austro-Hungarians did well on was the Italian front when Luigi Cadorna was the Italian Chief of Staff. Yet Cadorna would be replaced by Armando Diaz after the Battle of Caporetto in 1917, and Diaz was a very competent commander, so Austria-Hungary isn't going to be doing so well anymore. Basically, the longer the war persists, the worse things are going to look for Austria-Hungary regardless of a German victory. Regarding the Ottoman Empire, the British-led Entente forces were on a winning streak throughout the Middle East since 1917, and just because Germany has won in France doesn't mean the British will just stop fighting the Ottomans. The Ottoman Empire will still collapse as the British are beating the living crap out of them. And no, Germany wouldn't instantly be able to send more forces to the Middle East to stabilize the situation because they're busy in France with an overstretched and expended line against the Entente in neutral France. Also, Germany is starving at this point. Regarding the Salonika front with Bulgaria, things would likely remain a stalemate as the Bulgarians essentially did nothing but win for most of the war. So at the end of the war, Bulgaria will pretty much be the only central power in the best position as Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empires collapse. Germany has gained some land, but now has to administer it at the same time as Bolshevik revolutionaries are trying to start revolutions all over Eastern Europe, and France is in a chaotic mess. The post-war multipolar world would see the US probably disappointed due to entering the war at essentially the end for nothing but dropping Germans in 1918 after a French surrender. So the US either retreats to isolationism or embraces internationalism to eventually challenge Germany on the world stage, as the exhausted Germans have a lot of issues to deal with, ranging from communist uprisings to independence movements in Eastern and Central Europe. Britain would have also been hit hard by the German victory, yet the British would be able to get over it faster than the French as Britain has beat the Ottoman Empire. The 1920s would see a depressed Britain slowly recover with a disappointed America and a defeated France. Also, Russia has a civil war that would only see German intervention to keep their holdings in Eastern Europe as Germany tries to maintain their client states. Meanwhile, the Balkans will see Bulgaria gain some territory. This is of course just one possible scenario about if Wilhelm Wassmuss didn't lose his codebook in a Persian hotel. What do you think would have happened? Let me know in the comments, and thank you for watching.